Hey, thank you so much for joining us today. I am looking forward to our conversation as we talk about reason. Have we lost the ability to reason? Have we lost the ability to reason? That's on the table. Uh, Reason, logic, where has it gone? Um, you see it all the time. And now we're wondering if we're at a place now where we must cancel each other because we're not thinking right. According to a new proposal, if a Christian college, for example, doesn't present evolution as fact, teaches the Bible as true history, well, then they shouldn't be accredited. We just have to get rid of them. There is no room for argument. Is that based on logic and reason? Are some of the ways that we're treating each other based on logic and reason? We're going to talk about that. Professor Kenneth Samples is the author of many great books dealing with this very issue. He's a senior research scholar at Reasons to Believe, a philosopher, theologian. Kenneth Richard Samples, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Michelle. It's good to talk with you.
You've written many books, God Among Sages, Christianity's Most Dangerous Ideas, Seven Truths That Changed the World, all spectacular books that get you thinking. And it's not just about, hey, this is what you must think, but there's an idea behind that of look through logic and reason.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think that you're right on target because I think we're living at a time where, if we don't like what a person has to say or if they hold a different worldview or a different perspective than ours, we cancel them. Whereas, in a classical sense, if we go back to Plato and Aristotle, the idea is make your case. If you hold a point of view, make your case. Tell us why you think that's reasonable and rational and good. And Christians, of course, picked up on that idea in the history of the faith. We have faith, but it's a reasonable faith, and we believe in arguments. We don't attack people, but we do critique bad ideas. And so I think reason and rationality and logic is a gift of God, and I think it's something that is unfortunately a bit rare in the marketplace of ideas these days.
So, as we talk today, this isn't about Christian indoctrination or trying to prove that what you believe is the only way to believe. Beyond that, you have to start somewhere. And I think that's what we're both getting at, is you have to start somewhere. You have to start in your head, logically going through what is happening around us, digesting what's happening around us and putting it in perspective. And that's where logic and reason come into play. The problem, though, is that we have become a society that's more given to rhetoric, feelings. Yeah. And is that born out of moral relativism?
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that because, again, if we go back to the classical world, Socrates ran into that in ancient Athens 500 years before the birth of Christ. There were people called the sophists, and they were very good at making the worse argument appear the better, and they relied on rhetoric, but what was absent is argument. And an argument in logic is a very simple thing. You make a claim, and then you seek to back up the claim. So your claim is your conclusion. The support are called the premises. Or put very simply, Michelle, an argument is a supported opinion. And so I think we are experiencing kind of a moving forth of relativistic ideas. And it's important that people in the public sphere like you and like myself and others that, we convey to people we have very important ideas, but we think we have a good basis for believing in them.
Okay. I want to get to some of the faith issues a little bit later. Right now, though, diversity of ideas is becoming taboo. Prevailing ideas kind of demand allegiance, and there is no room for question. And we're seeing that played out in the public square with everything from the coronavirus to areas of faith, religious, and political ideas. There's just no end to it, and it almost seems like we're on the verge of a civil war because of this clash. Yeah, people have lost jobs. We've been canceled on social media. This is taking place. Is there room in the world of logic for this kind of behavior? And where is logic in our society today?
Yeah, well, I think you paint a realistic picture. The university, as we thought about it, it used to be called a classical liberal education, and what that meant was you had a very strong sense of free speech. People had to make their case and defend their case, but the university allowed for freedom of differing ideas, and so the idea was. Let that controversial person come and make their case, but then they're going to be critiqued. And I think the reality, the benefit of that classical tradition of free speech, debating, going back and forth, is that we need that. To discover truth, we need diverse positions that are evaluated and critiqued. And simply eliminating that, I think unfortunately, we've lost the university system if that's taken away. And, tolerance implies differences. Tolerance recognizes that people take differing points of view. And that classical sense is to say, look, I'm not going to attack you. I respect you as a person. You have dignity and value. In fact, my theological views is you're made in the image of God. But you have to back up your claim. And if you can't, then you have to consider other things. And so logic is critical, Michelle. I think it is absolutely an indispensable tool in helping us to discover truth. And I share with you the concerns about our culture.
Is it seemingly more difficult then to separate someone's ideas and beliefs from the person? I hear you say, I'm not going to attack you. I'm going to, debate your ideas, your beliefs, the things that you're expounding on. But I don't think I mean, it's hard for all of us. Okay, I read one of your postings from Reasons to Believe. I should put a link to it. And of course, it caught my eye because I'm kind of geeky. And it was from 2012, Marvel Comics and Logical Fallacies. And I love that you said, as we're sitting around, and I've been to the headquarters at Reasons to Believe. I didn't get to meet you face to face. I'm so bummed. But they had this great spread of food, and I got to sit around with all of the scholars there and talk about really cool things. And I get this picture as you guys are all sitting around the table there talking about who's the coolest Marvel comic, right? All these brilliant scientific minds. That's what you're talking about in your spare time there. But what I loved is that you said, we all have the tendency to hulk out when someone challenges our irrefutable beliefs. All of us do.
Yeah.
We all hulk out. You hulk out. We all do.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, Michelle, that there is a real tendency, and I think sometimes as we grow older, to only want to hear people who kind of support our viewpoint. And there is what is called confirmation bias. That's simply the idea that we tend to go looking for support of our view and kind of conveniently ignore things that go against our perspective. I know that's part of the human condition. And, when it comes to controversial issues like politics, there's an easy tendency, hey, I'm comfortable listening to that person, but the other person makes me feel uneasy. He or she's raising questions that I feel a little tense about. But you know what, Michelle, I actually try to listen to people who have differing views because I want to, hey, if I've missed something, I want to hear what is, and this is what I often tell my students. You know, if you're writing a paper, at the end of your paper, tell me what the best argument is on the other side and how you would respond to it. And I think that is a classical education. That's what our young kids need in public schools. It's what everybody should receive in a good high school education. And when you go to the university, your ideas should be challenged. And you know, it is easy, you know, maybe some of the scholars will differ with my view, and I might want to take that personally. But in reality, if somebody can correct my views and I can come to a clearer view of what's real and true and good, then they've done me a service. But unfortunately, we now live at a time where that free speech, that challenge is absent.
We are in a kind of a dangerous mode as well as we look at what's happening in the world around us. And there is no logic in the debate. It really comes down to tearing people down, going for the juggler. We've stopped teaching logic in schools. And I just wanted to ask you, just for fun, let's just imagine for a moment if logic was no longer allowed in the realm of science, what would science look like?
Wow, it would be devastating. I mean, you look at fields like, you know, philosophy, and you look at fields like science. The attempt is to develop a hypothesis and then try to test it, try to falsify it. You know, one of the presuppositions, Michelle, of logic of science is that our cognitive faculties and our sensory organs, that's our brain and our eyes and our senses, that they're reliable, and that logic and mathematics are reliable. So you really couldn't do science without accepting the reliability of logic and math. And yet there are people, I mean, when it gets down to issues today, like debates over vaccinations and things like that, you have at times people who kind of step back from those issues. So, you know, logic is such a critical discipline. And again, it gives us that objective. A good education, that is a challenging education that will prepare you to face the world and to succeed in the world, is when you don't hear just one voice. You hear multiple voices. And you have a dialogue rather than a monologue. And
Logic demands it, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, you and I are old enough to remember the regimes in some of the other countries of communism where you have one voice. What has made America a great nation, and the reason why people still want to come to America, is there is that capacity to examine ideas and reason through them. So reason is a good gift from God, and it's a powerful tool in your life.
Why have we stopped teaching logic in schools?
Well, it's a great question. I'll tell you this, Michelle. I've been teaching logic for I guess it's now 31 years. And my first class was in 1990. And of all the classes I've taught world religions, I've taught introduction to philosophy, I've taught ethics, comparative religions. The one class where students come back to me again and again over that 31-year period is they say, Professor Samples, logic, it empowers me. It has given me a capacity I didn't know that I had. I can take ideas and I can look at the arguments and I can evaluate them. And I just love it when the students tell me that logic is such a critical, class to them. And I don't know why we don't teach it right from the get-go. I don't know why we don't introduce these ideas even in elementary school, develop them into the middle school, and then require students in high school to take logic classes, maybe speech classes where they debate. These are critical skills, and the founding fathers of our great nation, they thought that kind of education was critical. It would help you to earn a living. It would help you to be a citizen, and it would help you to discern questions, the big questions of truth. So we need to return to it, and I think people need to. I mean, if I were to educate my children all over again, if my kids were young now, boy, I'd be thinking very carefully about how can I expose them to the very best education. And logic is such a critical class, and I don't know why we don't teach it at a much earlier place in our institutions.
Well, I'll give you my theory. I think that it seems a lot more rewarding for some to teach kids what to think rather than how to think. And then we've devolved into, instead of teaching kids what to think, we teach them what to feel. And that gets us even farther away from logic. We don't need to indoctrinate kids, as we started this conversation, into our faith and say, you must think like this. What you do is you teach your kids logic, and they can come to a logical conclusion, which inevitably, in my opinion, leads to the God story. Before we get to that God story with Professor Kenneth Samples of Reasons to Believe, I wanted to talk a bit about logic. Since it's not taught in schools, this is going to be a really fun conversation. If we can delve into what some of the logical fallacies are and what are some of the real examples of those fallacies in the world around us. Professor Samples, are you with me?
Yes, I'm here.
Perfect.
Yes.
All right, let's do this thing.
Yeah, very much. Let me throw out this, just a critical definition of logic.
Okay.
Logic is the study of reason, rationality, and arguments. And so arguments are very important. And an argument isn't, again, something that happens between, your spouse and you, or between your brother or sister or your parents. You can be reasoning and arguing without your jugular vein popping out or anything like that. It's to make a claim, and then seek to support the claim. And arguments break down, Michelle, and that's what we mean by fallacies. There's an error or a mistake in the reasoning process. And I'll give you a couple of good examples. If you present an argument to me, maybe about abortion, or maybe about traditional marriage, or any one of these controversial issues, and you make your case, you say, hey, here is the reasons why I think this view is valid, why it's reasonable, and I come back to you and I ignore your argument and I attack your character. Well, we call that the ad hominem. Homonym is the Latin for man or person. Mm-hmm. Well, an ad hominem is a deep fallacy, because I've ignored your argument and I've attacked your character. So anything I say to you is irrelevant, because I've never really gotten into to the argument. Here's another fallacy. It's called the ad populum. Where people go by sentiment. Everybody is doing it. I'll tell you a very quick story.
Okay.
Very quick story. In Nazi Germany, Albert Speer, who was Hitler's architect and became the Minister of Armaments and Munitions, Churchill later said that Speer was the most important Nazi because he probably made World War II last a couple years longer than it should have. Well, Albert Speer said he joined the Nazi Party not because he had investigated National Socialism and read Mein Kampf and read Nazi philosophy. He said he got caught up into it. He said all of his students were joining, and he said, I joined it because everybody's doing it. You can see how people make mistakes in reason. And if that could happen to Albert Speer, it could happen to us. We have
Is
to
it
be
happening
very
to us?
discerning. Well, I think it is happening to us. I think people make mistakes in reasoning, and they don't seriously challenge these kinds of things. If I were the president of a university, I would allow very controversial views to be presented, and I would just tell them, but when you're done, we're going to critique your view. We're going to take it apart, and we're going to take a look at it. I certainly would not. I think, Michelle, I think a college education should make you feel uncomfortable. That's the way you grow. That's the way you learn. And give
Whoa,
these. And
wait a minute,
I loved
wait
what
a
you said.
minute. I'm sorry, I got to stop you there. What about our puppy places and safe zones and coloring books and cocos when someone has a differing opinion? I mean, how do we get past that?
Well, I loved what you said when you said we don't tell people what to think. We teach them how to think. I mean, what a learning education. And this should happen not just in our universities. It should happen in our churches where people can learn to develop an
Thank
independent
you.
judgment.
Thank
And,
you. Yes.
there are times where you are going to feel, there are times where you are going to be uncomfortable, and you're going to hear things that are going to make you uncomfortable. But the classical world and the Christian church has always thought that's a very good place. You can discover truth when you have the skills to reason through and work through these issues.
Okay, so let's make some people uncomfortable. I'm ready for this. In the church, there is a lot of illogical fallacies that run amok, that destroy people. We have cultivated a people who are unchurched and dechurched, mostly because of some of those things you run up against. The kind of a bullying theology that if you don't think like me, well, then you don't love God. You're not really a Christian. You're not living your life the way you should. We like to become legalistic and play the Holy Spirit in other people's lives, tell people what they should think, how they should live, and we use the Bible as this authority to do so. But don't we also use fallacies, logical fallacies, bringing them up to our side when we really don't need to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that Christians at times engage in conspiracy theories. And again, I think sometimes there are reasons that happen. Christians believe there is an invisible, malevolent hand behind the universe, so they're a little suspicious. And sometimes our eschatology makes us feel untrusting of government, and there's certainly reasons to question the government at times. But yeah, I think that we've been talking about the lack of logic in universities. We need pastors to teach their congregations how to reason, how to think in a worldviewish manner, and I think we also need to return to that idea, Michelle, that we're tolerant and intolerant, always tolerant of people. All people are made in the image of God, regardless of their color, regardless of their sex, regardless of their financial status, where they've come from in the world. When Paul says there's no difference between Jew, Gentile, slave free, male and female, all are one in Christ, that's a revolutionary statement. But we also need to then teach them, hey, look, I'm going to treat people respectfully because that's part of the creation mandate, but I'm going to critique hard the argument. To accept a bad argument, to accept something that is false, that has deep negative repercussions. So this return, and I'll use the word for Christians if they're uncomfortable with the word logic. How about the word discernment?
Okay, there you
We're
go.
told test all things, hold on to the good. We're told the Bereans were more noble than the Thessalonians. Why? Because they tested. So there is an intellectual virtues that are taught in Scripture that I think our church needs to return to.
I'd like to take on some of the logic of a biblical worldview as we talk about the world around us and some of the big issues that we're faced with every day. The logical standing of a biblical worldview and why it may be important to include instead of disclude from the discourse.
Yeah, I mean again that's why I think people have always been attracted to America. This idea that we can. God has given us the capacity to think and reason. And and again, I would return, Michelle, to this idea that you don't want a monologue. You want a dialogue. You want to hear differing perspectives. And by the way, if I could offer, my own opinion, I think there are times where Christians rely too much on the idea that the courts are going to decide in our favor. So don't get me wrong. I think Christians have an obligation to vote. I think they have an obligation to discern what are the best candidates, who shares their values, to protect life, all of these things. But I also think that we need to be involved and to convey the idea of why we value traditional marriage, why marriage between one man and one woman, a life commitment. I think we need to influence people, not just in the voting booth, not just on the court level. We need to try to live our values, and those are challenging things. I mean, the church has always been in a place. Sometimes the church is advancing, influencing the culture. You look in church history, there are times where the church seems to be retreating, and ideas are challenging it. So, it's a tough time right now, but I think Christians who want to influence culture, they should vote for good candidates and serve in their civic responsibility. But I think Christians also need to have a witness, and it doesn't help when divorce rate in the church is competes with the world. It doesn't help when we have children born out of wedlock at a high rate. So we need to try to live that faith as well as voting for people we think
live that faith and be
represent our values.
upfront about that faith and even about our failings. We're going to fail because we're humans, but we like to set ourselves up as though we're the ascended as well. We see that in our culture where we have a lot of technocracy, where we have these technocrats that know better, but we do that in the church as well. And I'm all for calling out that hypocrisy as well. We've seen good people who have done horrific things. We've seen that with the Ravi Zacharias issue. We've seen that with some of the things that are coming against people like Dave Ramsey. Not everyone's perfect, and the best thing to do is say, "Yeah, I'm not perfect." And I'll be the first to volunteer myself for that. I suck, but God doesn't. He's amazing. My thing is, though, that we have got to be in a place where we are transparent, where we're real. And logic does bring us there. And there is some, and I wanted to maybe end our conversation as we come to the end of our time together with some specific ideas from the Bible that fit in to a logical argument that people can take home from today and go, okay, I need to maybe think about this.
Yeah, No, I like your idea of the transparent. I think that's such a critical idea. Yeah, from a biblical point of view, remember that a lot of the great logicians in history, Michelle, were Christians.
Mhm.
And they believed in reason, rationality, argument, the laws of logic, because they believed that those came from the mind of God. And from a biblical point of view, Paul, the apostle in 1 Thessalonians 5:21, there are different prophets at the church, and he says, test all things and hold on to that which is good. John, the apostle, in 1 John says, test the spirits. Be cautious because many false prophets have gone out into the world. Again, Luke says the Bereans were more noble than the Thessalonians. Why? Because Paul was preaching, and those Hebrew Christians were opening the old what they called the Old Testament, and they were testing. So putting ideas to the test and looking very carefully at them and looking at the evidence, I think is part of it's part of the intellectual virtues. Just as there are moral virtues in Scripture, be faithful to your spouse, don't lie, don't steal. There are also intellectual virtues of being discerning, being careful, putting things to the test. I think those are logical principles. Those ideas are not just biblical; they're also philosophical and scientific and logical.
I think that the important thing for me personally, and as I talk to you, our listener, thinking about what I believe, you may know me and you may know that I'm the faith girl. Okay, that's cool. But I'm more than just a blind faith girl, Ken. I really want to
Yeah.
know what I believe is true, and I'm okay questioning it. If the claims of Jesus dying on the cross are absolutely outlandish, like a fable, then I want to know that. I want to look at the historical records. I want to look at eyewitnesses. I want to look at reliable reports. That's kind of why I think we took this on in the science realm, because in science you delve into things, you poke it and prod it. We are getting away from that in science, Ken, where we're actually using terms like settled science and science deniers. There is no
Yeah.
such thing. Science must be tested. It must be poked. It must be prodded. And if you don't believe that, then you are giving into your own logical fallacy and not allowing yourself the idea that maybe what you believe isn't true, and maybe someone has something valuable to say to add to your worldview. I'll give you the final word.
I completely agree. I think that I think the scientific community, there are times where the decided perspective kind of weighs heavily, and not everybody is given a place at the table. But that goes against, as you've correctly noted, that scientific investigation. And I return to the point you made. It's a great one. It's one I try to practice, and that is when I'm teaching people, I'm aware there are always ideas I'm going to be giving them, but I want to teach them how to think, not tell them what to think. And in the scriptures, Jesus and the apostles, they invite people to test the truth claims of Christianity and see if they hold up.
Well, that doesn't sound like a very religious practice. I think that goes against the idea of religion in some ways. But what you're talking about is true. And you've mentioned it through this whole interview, that the Bible says, but essentially, now this is Michelle paraphrasing, so give me some leeway here, Ken. God is essentially saying, you want a question? Come on, bring it on.
Yeah.
Just saying. Just saying.
Yeah.
I
Very
appreciate
good.
you joining me today and setting aside this time. I think it's a very important conversation to have, and I'm glad that you could come on and challenge us to maybe abandon the feeling, and my heart believes. It's like this Disney philosophy that's taken over the world, right? Follow your heart, and I just want to sing with birds chirping around my head. But maybe it's time for us to abandon that and look for a little more logic and a little more reason. See where that takes you. For me, it takes me to the God story. Professor Kenneth Samples, he's an author and senior research scholar at Reasons to Believe.
And now, Reasons to Believe.
Gotta love it. Gotta love it.
Very good, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ken. I appreciate you being with us today.
I'm happy to do it. I hope you have a good week.
You too. Bye-bye now.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right, that's the interview that's going to be in the show, but you got to watch it live. So tell me what you think. Ask your questions, because this is a place where you're not going to be torn down. You're not going to be uglified because you think something differently. Let's just talk about it. Let's bring it back to a place of reason. You and I both know this is a world where I'm going to take these off. Then we can just talk without those things. You and I both know that we live in this world where brothers against brother, and we hate each other. We're angry at each other. We've demonized each other. We want to shut people down. You and I can be part of the solution. Maybe we can't do anything. I'm not important enough to start a world movement, likely. But if it's just you and just me, just the way I talk to the one I love, and stay away from the anger and the angst, and making them feel like they're second-class citizens, I want to commit to doing that. I want to be a better person that way. I think, to me, that's part of the God story. So anyway, I'd like your thoughts on My Michelle Live and our podcasts. You can email me, Michelle at MyMichelleLive.com. You can visit our podcast at MyMichelleLive.com. Everywhere podcasts are, for the most part, we're there. And if you don't see us somewhere, let us know. Be part of sharing the God story. Let's be part of making this world a better place. Thanks for joining me today. Now I've got to figure out how to stop sharing. I'm kind of new to this. Embarrassing. Here we go.